What is up, guys? Alex Fan Creates here. Welcome back to another video. Today, I want to talk about the different Waves SSL channels, and I think this is going to be helpful for anybody who's looking at which SSL channel they should get, or if you have all the SSL channels and you have the SSL bundle, what they're actually doing. What are the features of the different channels that you should actually be looking at, and what are the actual sonic differences? So we're going to look at the three different SSL channels that Waves has now: the SSL E channel, the SSL G channel, and then the newest SSL EV2 channel. First, we're just going to look at the interfaces and the usability and the functionality. Then we're going to actually look at some EQ curves and what's happening under the hood. And third, we're going to listen to some actual use cases and audio examples. So, well, yes, this is going to get a little bit nerdy. I think this is going to really help you if you're mixing what is actually happening with your EQs and actually understanding the tools. So let's dive into it. First off, looking at the three of them, we have the E channel and the G channel. Now, these have been around for a long time. And then we have the new EV2 channel over here. E channel and the G channel, they are different channels. They're from different consoles, but a lot of what's different is actually different under the hood, not on the surface. The big difference between the two of them is actually in the EQ. Now, both of these channels do have the black EQ, not the brown EQ, and you can't change them. But the big difference between the two of them, on the E channel, you have the bell button at the top, but on the G channel, you have the HMF X3 button. And most people don't think about this, but those are two very different functions. But this bell button, what is the actual difference? What is it doing? So on the E channel, when you boost the top end, you're boosting a shelf. It's by default a shelf. You can then hit this bell button and it becomes a bell. But in the G channel, you have this HMF X3 and this LMF X3 button on the top end and low end. So what it does is it takes the EQ point in the high mid frequency or the low mid frequency, and it times that frequency value by 3. What effectively now you can do is you can create a bell in the higher frequencies because you can take the high mid band and kind of bump it up. So depending on what you're looking for and what you're actually trying to get out of this EQ, this is a cool way to work. Now, when we go over to the SSL EV2 channel, it's not a replacement for the G channel. It's more of a replacement for the E channel or an upgrade to the E channel. But when it comes to the EQ, we get the bell button and we also get the EQ type. So we can actually change it from a brown to a black EQ. The brown versus black controls are basically all the same. It just changes the max boost and cut on all four of the EQ sections in the EQ, and it changes the high pass slope. So we're going to look at that. But that's basically the difference in the EQ and the EQ types. And then the other addition to the EV2 is this input gain section. So you have mic saturation, line saturation, which on the other two channels, they just kind of have the basic input gain and a phase flip. But now you actually can do mic input saturation and get a little bit of that crunch on it, which is actually really fun to do and just drive the input to the channel a little bit more. That was not really modeled on the previous versions. And the other big difference, obviously, which is a bit frustrating, but also the way it should technically be a bit more, is that the EQ is on the right-hand side and the dynamics is on the left-hand side. Not functionally different, just layout-wise is different. So now let's take a look at some of the EQ curves and what's actually happening under the hood. I obviously can't go through everything here. I'm just going to hit some of the main points or some of the things you should be aware of. But if you're curious to do this for yourself, these tests for yourself, I will leave a link in the description to this EQ analyzer because it is free. It's really, really good and really helpful to really understand these. So let's dive into some of the main tests and let me show you. It's not necessarily what's written, and let's look at the differences between the same settings on each one of these EQs. So first off, just putting on the SSL E channel does nothing. If you have the EQ normalized, it does absolutely nothing. Same with the G channel. If you put the G channel on, again, look, it does absolutely nothing. And then with the SSL EV2, it does actually change the EQ slightly. So if I zoom up a bit on this curve, you can see it's actually boosting a little bit of the bottom end and it's taking a little bit away around 2.5K. There's a little bit of a dip. Now, obviously, that's very subtle, but that is a difference that just simply by putting this EQ on your channel, this is what's happening. Now, if I change the EQ type itself, the black has none of that. Only the brown will actually do this kind of slight change. So again, these are the things that people don't realize, but just putting that piece of gear on with that EQ, there's no settings on this EQ itself, but it's changing the tone ever so slightly. For now, I'm just going to leave this EV2 channel on the black EQ so we can compare it directly to the SSL E channel. So first, we're just going to take a look at the low-end shelf boost. I've just put a 5 dB boost at 60 Hertz on each one of these channels. So they're all identical at this point. The SSL E channel looks like this. Now, at 60 Hertz, it's actually only boosting by 4.1 dB-ish. We are almost hitting 5 dB down at about 20 Hertz. So you can see how it's not exactly what's written on the SSL channel itself. Now, if we go to the G channel, what it's doing is same 5 dB boost is actually nowhere near 5 dB anywhere on the spectrum, but it's a little bit more of a rounded out low end instead of such a dynamic curve. Now, we are boosting even up to 200 hertz. We're boosting 1.5 dB, so it's not insignificant. Then when we go to the SSL EV2, we get a kind of an in the middle thing. So it's again not hitting 5 dB anywhere on the spectrum, but it's got a bit of a sharper slope. So at 60 hertz, we're only doing almost about 3 dB, which is not the 5 that I put in. And then if I go to the Brown EQ on this, you can see again it's slightly different. It's a different slope, so a little more gradual. Again, doesn't hit 5 dB. So 5 is not actually 5 dB on any of these. So the next test we're going to do, and we can't compare this on the G channel, but between the SSL E channel and the EV2 is putting the bell button on. We're going to have the same settings, so it's still 5 dB at 60 hertz, but it now has the bell button. So the original E channel has quite a bump at 60 hertz. We are at 60 hertz and we're almost hitting 6 dB. So now we're over the 5 dB that we thought, but it's a way more drastic bump in the low end. But when we switch over to the black on the EV2, it looks fairly similar, actually. It's not boosting quite as much, even though it's the same setting. It's a bit more true, actually, to what it says. It is at about 5 dB, but we're talking the peak at 5 dB is at 50 hertz, not as much at 60. Once we get to 60, it's a bit lower. And then on the G channel, I'm just going to prove that when you hit this button, literally nothing happens to the low end. It does not affect the actual LF shelf at all. Now, on the G channel, what we're going to actually do is we're going to show you what this LMF does. So we're going to boost, let's do 5 dB again at 0.5 on the low mid frequency. And oh, I have to zoom out on the thing. So we can see it's boosting. 5 is not 5 dB because we are at 6.7 at 500. So it is at the right frequency, but if we hit the LMF +3 button, what's going to happen is it lowers it. So it's kind of like the high mid frequency that when we boost it, it boosts the mid frequency into the high frequency range so that we can create effectively a bell curve in the high frequency. Same thing happens with the low mid frequency. We've lowered it down so that it's now effectively creating a bell in the low frequency using the low mid frequency EQ band. So this is now essentially creating a bell at 100 hertz. Again, it's 6 dB, not the 5 that I put in, but it did move it down. You can see it kind of move over and move down. We now have a flexible Q bell that we can change the Q for, unlike the E channel, which the low frequency and high frequency bell, they're set. They are what they are. You can't change them. So now let's take a look at the top end of these EQs. I'm going to add a 5 dB boost at 10K on each one of these. So for the original SSL E channel, what we get is this nice little curve. It does drop off right at the top, but you can kind of see the nice little curve. When we go to the G channel, it's a very different curve. Again, this is the same setting on the G channel, but you'll see it dips a little bit around 700, and it's a lot wider of a shelf than it is compared to the E channel. Then when we go to the EV2 looks a lot more like the SSL E channel. It's a little bit more of a gradual, broader slope. Now, again, we're only almost hitting 4 dB. We're not even close to the 5 dB that I actually put in on this thing. So now let's hit the bell button on both of these and see the difference there. So the EV2 has a nice bell like that. It did boost it, but it's kind of the same slope almost. It just boosted a little bit more. I put it to 5 and we are actually hitting 5 now with the bell. So that's good. Now, if we go to the original, it's fairly close. It drops off a bit more on the very top comparatively to the EV2. But again, it is actually hitting just above 6 dB at 10K. So it is fairly true to what it says for the bell button, but the shelf is not what it says basically. But the last thing that I want to show you is the filters, because I use the filters on the SSL channels on a ton of stuff. So I feel it's important to really know what they're doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it to about 120 hertz on the low end on each one of these, and then I'm going to put the high-end one at about 8K. So now, once again, all three channels have the same filters on the high end and the low end, because we can kind of look at them simultaneously because they don't overlap in that way. So with the original SSL E channel, this is the curve that you get. It does kind of fall down a little bit more on the top end, but it is a pretty drastic low end cutoff. So 120 hertz is about actually right here. So it's already dipping by that point. So it does actually kind of start cutting off a little bit earlier, but it's a pretty sharp drop off. So now we're going to look at this compared to the new EV2 with the black EQ. and look at how vastly different these 2 points are. My mouse didn't change. That's 120 hertz, and that's where I have put it, but it's nowhere near 120 hertz on the filter on the new EV2. It's all the way down here at 50 hertz. That's where it's rolling off. Again, the top end is a bit more noticeable. The settings that we put in on the EV2 channel on the high end are what we think, but it's not at all what we think on the low end versus the SSL original E channel. It's so different. Now, if we compare that to the SSL G channel, the SSL G channel and the original E channel are a lot more similar. So this is the original G channel curves, and then we'll compare that to the original E channel curves. You can see they are a lot more in line with each other. So it is very interesting. This is a very valuable test to just understand your tools better. And I love doing this, and I'm gonna make more videos like this with various different tools and things that I find, because I do this on my free time all the time and check out different EQ curves and figure out what the tools are doing, because I know which one to pick for different scenarios depending on what I want and how to manipulate the settings to actually get what I want. When I think that a setting's doing something and it's not doing remotely that's a problem. But understanding my tools is a very valuable thing. Now, of course, when it comes right down to it, and the real point of all of this knowledge is, how does it sound? So let's dive into some actual audio tests of the different EQ channels and what they're doing when you actually apply them to stuff. All right, so I have 4 different audio tests. We're gonna look at a kick drum, then we're gonna look at an acoustic guitar, then an electric guitar, and then finally some vocals. What I've done is I've just used the SSL E channel, the classic SSL E channel, and found a setting that I like, and then applied that to the other 2 channels so we can hear how the same setting sounds different on all 3 of the different channels. For each test, we're going to listen to the raw audio, then we're going to listen to the SSL E channel, then the SSL G channel, and then finally the SSL EV2 channel. So first up, drums. We're going to be listening to the kick in mic and the snare top mic soloed so you can really hear exactly what it's doing to that mic specifically. Now, in that test, I actually had to alter the settings slightly to make them work. On the SSL G channel, I had to use the low-mid frequency band, and then use the LMF divided by 3 button to get it to actually be able to create a bell on the low end, like the other channels had. So there is a good example of how you'd use that button in context. Next, we have an acoustic guitar. Now, this acoustic guitar is 2 mics each, and then it is doubled, so there's actually a left and a right. Then I'm applying these SSL channels to the summed bus. Now let's dive into an electric guitar test. And finally, a test on some raw vocals. Now, I did add a bit of a de-esser as my voice is a bit sibilanty, especially when I add the top end that I add with the SSL channel. So there is a bit of a de-esser on here. Speaking recklessly, inflicting all this pain. 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 That is it for this video, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that gave you some idea on the different tones in the SSL channels and their differentiating features. You can't really go through everything and test every different combination of settings and how they actually sound. So I hope this gave you at least some better of an idea. Please let me know any questions you have down below or any follow-ups or tests that you'd like to see. I'm more than happy to do them or put them up on my website. So let me know in the comments below. But I will see you in the next video. Until then, always be creating.